But we're going to start with a major rebrand, what I would call a deep rebranding. And this is a company that I think is familiar to most of you. It's one of it is the largest diagnostics company in the country. So most of you probably have been to a Labcorp to get your blood work done. But Labcorp is much more than that, and in fact, that's part of the story that we're going to dig into here. It's a company that not only through recent acquisitions, but also through its legacy investments and concerns, actually has a broad reach into everything from drug development to broader diagnostics to D2C, and even general medical services. So they went through recently a major rebrand, a deep rebrand, and we're going to talk with Jen Sutton about not only what went into that rebrand, but also what it takes for a company to make that kind of rebranding, how it understands whether it's measuring success, and whether rebranding like this really matters. Jen Sutton is the VP of Brand and Marketing at Labcorp. Before joining Labcorp, she was at WeWork, which means you must have a lot of stories to tell. That's another interview, probably off the record. Just bang it a few times, and it's technology. Just bang it, and it starts working. All right, keep banging.
Hold on, I'm going to give you mine until we get that sorted out.
Yeah, that's what I found. It always happens that way. Just keep hitting it.
This is number 4.
Yeah.
Let's try.
Right, that's right.
Let's try number 3.
God, they really do control all the data, don't they? Before that role at WeWork, she was Vice President of Marketing and Communications at LivePerson, and before that, she worked at Google. Please welcome Jen Sutton. If it's working, there you go.
I think it's working, yes. Thank you.
Let's start with the basics, the overview of the brand and our understanding of what Labcorp is and what its embrace is. Let's bring up the first slide because that sort of illustrates what we're talking about here. And you can sort of just briefly describe what Labcorp is that we don't already know because we're just going there to get our blood taken.
Right. So this is a sampling of some of the companies that we've either acquired or partnered with most recently. And to Steve's point, most people think that Labcorp is simply a lab that takes your blood. And Labcorp is much more than a lab. We do strong science and innovation is what we do. We have a drug development arm that's been under a different brand called Covance over the past 7+ years, Labcorp's own Covance. We have lots of specialty labs that focus on oncology, neurology, types of blood disorders, and so on. And through the past 50+ years of Labcorp's existence, the company has continued to grow largely via different acquisitions. Some of these here, Ovia Health is a consumer application for women who are either trying to get pregnant or are in the middle of their pregnancy journey, and it helps to close gaps in care and provide information and testing information to those women and their families. Ascension is one of the biggest hospitals in the country. We're now running all of their laboratories. And the reason that all of this is important, OmniSeq is an oncology company that does specific testing in oncology. All of these start to connect dots. To your point, we have a drug development arm that does the biggest central labs. We operate in over 100 countries. Our labs in the US are within about 5 miles of every American's home. We serve over 160 million patients each year. So you think about the breadth and the depth of what I'm talking about, and if we can connect the dots of, we have information about your diagnostics, but we're also running a clinical trial on behalf of a pharmaceutical company, we're able to start to connect patients to clinical trials and start to help our pharma partners bring their therapies and their drugs to market faster.
But internally, most of these companies actually do work very much in silos. I mean, when I go into a Labcorp, I'm not getting upselled or cross-sold any of this stuff.
Right. And actually, to date, the B2B experience, so the physician experience, has been very disjointed as well. Until we embarked on the rebrand in 2020, physician would have to go to a different website to order a different test. They would come to Labcorp for for regular sort of general health diagnostics, but they would go to our specialty labs to get specialty testing done. When in fact, it's all owned by Labcorp. The data actually does connect on the back end. We share with share with the patient in one patient portal the results. Why are we making it so difficult for everybody?
So we're starting to answer my next question is so you're doing a major rebrand. You're going to change, and we're going to look at what it looks like. But let's start by what are you trying to solve for in a rebrand? Why rebrand, and what are the specific goals of it?
I think number one, that the understanding of Labcorp's value and impact on consumers and professionals was undervalued. We surveyed the market, and there's a lot of trust in Labcorp's brand, which is awesome, and it's well known, which is also terrific. But again, the breadth and depth of what we do, even amongst our employee set, wasn't there. I was at an internal conference earlier this year, and I was sitting with folks in our drug development team, and they were like, well, what does it matter what we do on the diagnostic side in oncology? I said, well, think about that, right? If we can start to predict, based on your diagnostic information, what disease types you might be most susceptible to, right? We can start to introduce patients, introduce physicians, introduce hospital systems to clinical trials as a form of care in the next step of your healthcare journey.
So you're trying to knit this stuff together, but also from the consumer side, why do you need to rebrand from the consumer's perception of Labcorp?
Well, consumers increasingly have choice, as we all know. In Manhattan, where I live, there's a new medical or med spa type of facility pretty much at every corner. There's testing at every corner. There's a lot of D2C companies. I think there's over, I forget what the stat was, but there's an enormous amount of D2C companies that have come to market over the past couple of years. And we found almost a little bit by happenstance, particularly during the pandemic, that consumers were turning to us as a trusted source for information, and we just weren't properly answering their questions and their needs. And so we quickly started to pull that together. We had a test that was number one in the market for home testing, a PCR test called Pixel, sat under a different brand, different website. And was generating just organically tons of volume because you had a legitimate PCR test that you could take at home, and you knew the results were going to be accurate. It was accepted by different countries, et cetera, but it was operating under a different brand name. Right. Which today
you're getting no credit for it.
Right. No credit for it. Right. And when consumers have a choice, we want to make sure that that we're front and center and that they understand all the value that we can bring.
So let's look at the top line change, which is the logo.
Yeah.
Okay. Walk us through the logo. What was the thinking behind it? Why are these changes important?
Sure. So to start with, we made every letter lowercase. The goal was really to make the logo and the brand just feel more accessible. Additionally, by making it lowercase, we de-emphasized the lab piece a bit, as well as the corporation piece, in order to make it more accessible. So we did not change the name of the company, but we wanted to make it a more accessible, modern brand that's easier to interact with and easier to convey, again, that there's value beyond the laboratory diagnostics that we're most well known for.
So let's actually bring up the next slide, because a part of the logo is this. Explain this,
Yes.
Ori.
Yes, so this is a off-the-record conversation, because we have not officially rolled out the name of our new brand or our new logo, which internally we've started to refer to. We have the name. This is what's next, I think, in our horizon in 2023 and 2024. Ori, which stands for origin. The shape of the logo was inspired by looking at cellular structures under a microscope, and it really leans into our brand pillars of our role in healthcare being the source for making clear and confident decisions, and our role working across the healthcare industry to be the source for answers to move health forward.
I want to pick on drill into that idea of you have 4 pillars. Let's talk about those 4 pillars, because you really, I want to impress on everyone, this was more than a logo change.
Oh, yeah.
There was really a deep rethink of
Yes.
how they wanted to come to market and how they wanted consumers to think about it. So part of this included thinking deeply internally about what we really mean as a brand. So let's talk about the 4 pillars.
Sure.
And how you want consumers' impressions and understanding of the brand to change from those 4 pillars.
Yeah, and with consumers, I'll put the healthcare professionals and pharma companies in there too, all of our
Right.
customers. So one is science and data, and which is really at the core of what we do. We recently announced our new monkeypox test that came to market. We have a new NFL test, which is for head injuries and brain injuries that can detect whether it's concussion or other. So there's cutting edge science happening that again we weren't getting credit for, but is a pillar to how we operate and bring new solutions to market. Urgency is another pillar. The company proved to itself that the 2 sides of diagnostics and drug development could work together to bring new vaccines to market. We were behind, I think, 4 out of the 5 vaccines that came to market. We are behind, I think, over 85% of novel therapeutics that come to market. And the urgency is really what drives everybody, is that we know that patients' health is on the line and they need answers. Empowerment is another pillar, so making sure that acting as a source, that we're providing information for people to make those informed decisions, and that it's not buried or difficult to navigate to find that type of information. And last but not least is togetherness, that we are diverse, and we operate in over 100 countries, and making sure that everybody understands that we are all in this together, and that the employees in particular are the brand, and the brand is very dependent on the employees.
And I want to sort of underscore that idea of having that depth of understanding about what your brand is and defining it early on, because it seems to me, as I was going through all your materials, it has 2 really key functions. One is you have multiple constituencies.
Yes.
So you're not just talking to consumers.
No.
As you said, again,
Yeah.
your constituencies are...
Managed care, hospital
Right.
and health systems, pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies,
Right.
specialists, general practitioners, and of course consumers and
So
patients.
you
are at
need
the
a
core.
brand identity that has depth and can speak to multiple constituencies, but also you have a very deep and important content marketing strategy, and it's important at the onset of a major content marketing strategy to define basic principles that are going to inform everything that comes after it.
Yeah.
So there is always a set of sort of core of anchors that your writers, your imagists, everybody who's working can come back to and go back to those pillars.
Yeah. We even, we had our first company all hands, so we're over 75,000 employees across the globe. A lot of those folks are frontline workers, where we shared these pillars with everybody and we explained to them why we're doing what we're doing. Again, this wasn't just change the typeface and a prettier logo, on all of our customer touch points. It very much is at the core of what we do and how we communicate. And our first piece of content, our brand platform, is called In Pursuit of Answers. And we worked to actually have our employees star in the commercial, which was a enormous feat, if I do say so myself, navigating the company, remotely during the pandemic, trying to find all of these different roles of phlebotomist, courier, airline pilot. We have a small fleet of airplanes. Our logistics are insane. We cross the globe, I think, 2 times a day. So, lots of different facets of what we do that we wanted to bring forward, and we very much wanted it to be, core to our employees and true to ourselves.
Were there key learnings from that process of going around and having all those meetings with all these employees, explaining what the branding is, key learnings about how you go about doing that internally and rebrand internally?
Yeah, it was pretty amazing, the pride that came out internally. It was, pretty humble company over the past 50 years. We didn't have a chief marketing officer until early 2020. And so, talking about what we do, to the market at large was just not something that the company had done previously. And so speaking to some of our, one of our chief medical officers is in the commercial as well, and was like, what, you're going to film us in the lab? Like, it's so boring. No one wants to know what we're doing here. Like, we work in the lab all day. And since, folks have come forward and said how proud they are, how excited they are. We have several pieces of content. We have a campaign called Make Way for Better, which was in airports, and people are just super excited that the work that they've been doing, which is really impactful work, is finally getting some of the recognition that it deserves. And we're not over our skis. We're not over promising. We're simply just telling the world all of the amazing science and innovation that's happening.
And the idea that a rebrand has really important internal effects, that you're rebranding to your own people as much as you're rebranding to consumers, I think is like a key learning of this. And then you need to have a program for distributing that and for explaining that and getting their feedback and getting their buy-in, because they're ultimately, it's gonna, if you do it right, it reverberates at every touch point.
Totally. Yeah. We created a brand ambassador program, both on the diagnostic side as well as on the drug development side, because the drug development side is 30,000 employees roughly that were not just, they were changing the name of the company that had also been around for a good 30 years. And so they had to be bought in. We had to make it localized, again, across the globe in over 100 locations, celebratory parties, recruiting ambassadors from different locations, different types of roles, to make sure that their voices were heard, contests, like photo contests, or finding the old logo in the wild kind of contests, to make everybody feel that that sense of ownership.
Let's look at one of the video products of this.
Yeah.
And was this actually the TV ad?
Yeah, so this is the TV ad in Pursuit of Answers, and every person in this ad is a Labcorp employee, and actually shot in a Labcorp employee's home.
Every single day, for the good of millions all over the world, we rise and get to work. We push through the challenges to get a greater understanding.
Schools. Don't worry, you got this.
So we can help bring you better tests, more effective treatments and vaccines, and life-changing breakthroughs. And we never stop in pursuit of answers.
So that's really interesting. And of course, one approach to rebranding would be, well, let's buy the hell out of every TV spot we can find and do that and call it a day. But instead, you chose a very content-forward approach to rebranding. Tell us about the how you built a kind of storytelling machine for this, and especially what you learned about storytelling as a way to rebrand.
Yeah, some of the learnings that we had, well, I think first, again, sticking to those brand pillars and making sure that everybody sort of understood and that the content was really anchored in those brand pillars. And this being our platform in Pursuit of Answers, things sort of stemming from that, if you will. As a publicly held company that didn't have a chief marketing officer until a couple of years ago, we couldn't just, plaster everything, with Labcorp's new identity and content. We wanted to make sure that we were connecting, the right stories to the right people at the right time, which, obviously a lot of folks in this room focus on, insofar as leveraging, the right technology and the right mediums to do so. So this was the anchor piece of content, and from there we've created a few more. We started our content series, if you will. We've been working with Wired's Brand Lab. And we chose Wired because they're good storytellers. They align to our technology, innovation, The type of consumer that is reading or engaging with Wired's content marries very much to the type of consumer that we're trying to reach. The first piece that we're telling a story about is liquid biopsy. The importance of this is that if I just told you about liquid biopsy, you'd probably might gloss over it, right? It wouldn't really resonate. The story that we're telling is about access to answers, and liquid biopsy is a blood test that can identify biomarkers of different types of cancer in your blood. It's a lot less painless than having to have a tumor cut into. It doesn't necessarily prevent that from happening, but these are advancements that are important for both healthcare providers and consumers to know about, so that they can ask, so that they can ask the right questions and get the right answers and be more empowered to take better control of their own health. That's one example.
Now, content, and you're not necessarily using the usual suspects. You're using Wired. You're not using WebMD for that.
Right.
I'm curious about content marketing is often hard to measure. I mean, almost everybody in content marketing, groans about how do you estimate the ROI. So when you're leaning into content marketing, you're investing so much in it, you're making such comprehensive changes. How are you measuring success here?
Sure. Well, it's content marketing in conjunction with a changed digital experience across all touch points. We had over 50-something websites that we've rebranded. We're continuing to bring that into one cohesive brand experience, and then we want the content to bring all of that together so that, again, it's just it's not dry information, it's information that you can connect with and resonates with you. Our measurement is largely about the type of engagement that we're getting with the right audience. We do frequent surveys of different customer groups to see, are we being appreciated for our scientific expertise, perhaps more so than we were 6-8 months ago. We're seeing really high engagement with the content. Folks are watching 4 minutes of a 5-minute piece on average, which is extraordinary. And the other thing that is that we're building into our ROI model is that this isn't just like a one-time put it out there type of thing. We've actually we have all of the B-roll and all of the footage, and we can now, cut up and slice and dice that content into lots of other assets that the team can use. So it goes from, awareness that we have these types of capabilities really down into, a sales meeting or a small conference where we could repurpose this type of content so that it has legs and it has a bit of a long tail, if you will.
And what is the distribution strategy here? Are you, what are the, you're putting a lot of content online. How are you mainly driving people to it?
We are working with our partners at Publicis and leveraging lots of different forms of paid media. We opened up our social channels only a couple of years ago, again in the height of the pandemic. So we've sort of been transforming in the middle of the pandemic. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. But you're turning around a very big ship.
Yes, it's a very big ship with lots of disparate systems. A lot of
disparate systems, a lot of legacy brands, a lot of many toes that are just waiting to be stepped on. Tell me, what are some of the key lessons you've learned over the last few years about making this kind of fundamental change that involves so many different constituencies, so many different people, but also is changing a legacy brand in very fundamental and deep ways?
I think the first is lean into what you know and go, which our CFO likes to say. It's kind of funny as a marketer that I'm borrowing from our CFO. But it resonated with me when he said it, because the man who's in charge of all the finances is telling me that if I have 80% of the data, it's good enough and I can go, right? Which I think is inherent to something like this. We could get stuck in analysis paralysis and try to measure, till the cows come home, what folks think of us across different customer groups. But we did our survey. We across different customer groups, we had a benchmark understanding of what the brand was thought of. Again, there were some positives in there. It wasn't all negative, but wow, what an opportunity there is when you have all of these, over 50 brands and assets that sit beneath it that just haven't been tapped
Are there
into.
good examples of where you sort of went with what you had? You knew that you knew you could probably do more, but you needed to just move. It was important to just keep momentum and keep moving forward in the rebrand.
It's a great question. Well, I mean, I think just the data itself of like continuing to go forward with the brand, because if you solicit feedback and you hear from everybody, well, I'm not sure that this is going to work. I think there's a bit of like trust your gut. You have enough data and information that, for example, primary care providers and specialists just think of us as, or have traditionally thought of us as, your routine diagnostics company. And they may still be going to a specialty website of ours, again, to order tests or to interact with the head of a lab there, but not knowing that, that it's a Labcorp company that they're working with and that they're getting value from.
What does success look like in the end? How are you going to know that you've made all the right decisions?
I think that we will know based on both our employees' engagement. We're seeing a lot of retention and enthusiasm behind what we're doing. Certainly, in the market, as we continue to survey and get feedback from our customer groups, how they think of us. The engagement online is enormous. Again, we went from, I wish we had the before and after of the website. We went from a very dry corporate website with little to no imagery on it to one that is engaging, I think, has content, has information, and can start to be a real source for, for advancing health. And I think on the consumer side, we launched a sub-brand called Labcorp On Demand, which is our direct-to-consumer offering, not just for at-home tests, but also for scheduling your own tests. If you want to go get your health and wellness test before you visit the primary care doctor for your annual wellness visit, you can actually go get those tests yourself, get the results, and then show up and have an informed discussion, with your physician, and that it saves them time too, right? So it's across the different customer groups, the engagement, the turning to us for those answers, and us really living up to our brand promise, which is to be the source.
So just as a wrap question, let me be the cynical journalist, okay?
Yeah.
Who will come at this, and we get all these press releases about rebrands all the time, and we look at it and say, oh look, they changed the upper to lowercase.
Right.
And as a patient, coming in, because I am one of your customers, talk me down from my cynical ledge that this doesn't matter. I mean, that a rebrand, does a rebrand really matter in the end? Does it have impact? Does it matter to anybody else but maybe the company itself?
If we can arm consumers with the information that they are entitled to and empower them to make just more informed decisions, to ask the right questions, and I think we've done our job. And I without the rebrand, with disparate brands operating as they were in silos, that information would never cohesively be available. And so it really is about pulling together all of these assets in a comprehensive, cohesive way that really unifies the experience and ultimately really empowers our customers and in particular, our patients. So ideally, when you walk into a patient service center in the future, you will feel comfortable being there, which most folks do. You get in and out quickly, but maybe you'll also, be able to grab more information or scan a QR code and be brought to something that teaches you about, differences in your microbiome and your gut health, right? And why that might matter if you're feeling, sluggish or you have, different types of anxiety and so on. So just making sure that our customers are getting the information that they're entitled to, really, and we have tons of it.
Well, thank you, Jen. We have time for questions. If anybody has any questions of Jen.
Quiet room.
Yep, I see one back here.
Sure. Scott Ensign, Butler Till. I'm just wondering, one of the points of frustration as a consumer is at the point of diagnosis. You mentioned before kind of predictive data for things like clinical trials and what conditions people are likely to develop. One frustration for me is that diagnosis often seems to be dependent on a doctor's individual experience and not based on data. So I'm just wondering, what do you see as the potential antidote for that with the work that you're doing?
Yeah, we are, thanks for the question. We're starting to bring together, again, what had previously been disparate systems, to bring that information together so that our AI scientists can, mine that data and bring forward the types of insights that you're talking about. I envision a future where Labcorp On Demand, which is largely our consumer brand that consumers will interact with, would be something that you would go to, to see that type of information. Like, how do I stack up against other 40-something-year-olds? That. Sorry, I'm referring to myself. I'm admitting age here.
Scott's saying he's 27.
Yeah.
So what are you talking about?
I'm admitting a little bit of my age. How do I stack up, to others? What should I be on the lookout for? What types of questions should I be asking? What type of tests should I maybe take? And we don't want to drive unnecessary testing for the sake of it, obviously, but there's a lot of information. I think diagnostic results were only made available to consumers, 40-ish years ago? Does that sound right? Don't quote me on that. I'll check that.
Yeah, I think before that, doctors just bring you in and say, I don't like what I see.
Right. You didn't even have the access to
Right.
the information. So increasingly, you will get access to your own information. And I think our job is to make it really easy to understand that information. And it's both for doctors and for consumers and patients as well. We find that doctors are too busy. They don't have time to be up on the latest and greatest. And they're not deep in the science on the day-to-day basis. They're, juggling time, and they don't, and they appreciate being taught things in a simple, easy-to-understand manner, just like we do as, as regular consumers, if you will.
I think, Jen, we've made the case
Yeah.
that branding matters. But I think that all the lessons that come out of this is branding matters if you really know what you're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, if you actually have a deep understanding of your own brand and where you want it to go and what it means, and you have a plan in place, especially internally, to communicate that throughout your own company,
Yeah.
but also have really a firm, solid base of principles and ideas that inform every piece that goes out.
Yes.
But it really, to rebrand is not a superficial thing. It actually has to be really deeply ingrained. It has to start with a very deep and detailed plan and
Yeah.
set of thoughts.
Yeah, and bringing in your employees could not be more important, right? When you think about all of the different customer touch points that we have across all of these different constituents that we're talking about, it's an enormous undertaking at the superficial level, right?
Right.
And so for folks to actually believe it and want to do that work at the deeper level, where it is about connecting the data to bring forward those types of insights, you really need your employees to believe and to embody the brand.
Jen Sutton, thank you so much.
Thank you.
for coming.
Thanks so much.
Watch.